government class. In today's government class, we'll be looking at nationalist movement. What is nationalist movement? Nationalist movement is any association formed by a group of people who share a common interest and history to resist political domination, economic exploitation, racial discrimination, and cultural intimidation, and to struggle for their political and economic independence. So, nationalist movement is basically any association that is formed by a group of people who share a common interest and history to resist political domination, economic exploitation, and racial discrimination and cultural intimidation. There are also people that struggle for their political, is the association of a group of people that struggle together for their political and economic independence. Some examples of nationalist movements are NCBWA, which means the National Congress of British West Africa. The National Congress of British West Africa. Other examples of nationalist movement are WASU, West African Students Union, the National Congress of British West Africa, NCBWA. We also have the Nigerian Youth Movement, the NYM. And the Pan-African movement. So these are all examples of nationalist movements. The next thing we'll be looking at in this class is the method of operation of the nationalists. What were the methods used by the nationalists in their operations, in their movements? That is what we are going to be looking at in this subtopic. The nationalists, in their struggle for greater political participation in political activities of their native land and eventual self-government, they used different methods. So the nationalists, when they were struggling for greater political participation, that is the proto-nationalism, and when they eventually struggled for their own self-government, they used different methods in their struggle. Among these methods, we have the newspaper or the press. Nationalists used newspapers to mobilize support, to expose the ill activities of the colonialists, and to create political consciousness amongst the people. So, one of the methods used by the nationalists in their struggle for greater political participation and self-government, and eventually self-government, was the newspaper or the press. The nationalists, they made use of the newspaper a lot, and they used it to mobilize support, to expose the evil activities of the colonialists, the bad things that the colonialists were doing. They used their newspapers to expose it, and they also used the newspaper to create political consciousness in the people. They used it to create political consciousness in the people towards the activities of their country. It was also used as a vocal point of opposition to British rules. They also used the newspapers and the press to vocalize it was used as vocal points of opposition to the British rule. So some of the examples of the newspapers that we had during those times were Lagos Daily Newspaper, West African Pilot, Lagos Daily News, West African Pilot, Connect, and Daily Express. Another method used by the nationalists in their operations were civil unrest, strikes, and protests. The nationalists used protests and strikes to oppose the bad policies of the British colonial rule. For example, the 1945 nationwide strike in Nigeria and the 1948 nationwide strike in Ghana. Also, we have the Aba Women's Riot of 1929. So these were all methods that were used by nationalists to oppose the bad policies of the colonial administration. Also, they made use of they participated in constitutional conferences. So participation in constitutional conferences was also one of the methods of operation used by the nationalists in their struggle for self-government and greater political participation. Agitation of the nationalists forced the colonialists to organize constitutional conferences to find solutions to the nationalist agitations. Such conferences were all attended by the nationalists. So later on in our classes, when we look at these constitutional conferences, we'll talk more on that. But for the course of this class, we'll just be stopping at this level, participation in constitutional conferences. So a lot of constitutional conferences came up along the line in this nationalist movement, and these constitutional conferences were the nationalist movement forced the colonialists to organize these constitutional conferences in order to find solutions to the nationalist agitations, and there were lots of conferences that were organized. Also, another method of operation used by the nationalists in their struggle for self-government and greater political participation was sending of delegates. The nationalists sent delegates in conjunction with protest letters and petitions to the colonial government and the Secretary of State for the colonies to drive in their demands. So the nationalists, they sent delegates and they also sent protest letters and petitions to their colonial government and Secretary of State in order to drive their demands for probably greater political participation or self-government. So this was also, sending of delegates was also one of the methods used by the nationalists. Another method used by nationalists in their operations were organization of seminars, symposia, and town hall meetings. So the nationalists, they organized seminars, symposia, town hall meetings where they discussed issues and colonial challenges. In these organizations, in these organized seminars, symposia, town hall meetings, they discussed they discussed issues and their colonial challenges. Another method used by the nationalists in their operations were the organization of political parties. Nationalists used political parties and in their activities. They used political parties and the political party activities to mount pressure on the colonialists. So the creation of political parties was also one of the methods used by the nationalists to mount pressure on the colonialists. Also, writing of protest letters and petitions. The nationalists wrote protest letters and petitions to express their displeasure with some colonialist activities and policies, and this was one of the methods also used by the nationalists in their struggle for greater political participation or eventually self-government. And with this, we've come to the end of this class. In the course of this class, we looked at nationalist movements and the method used by the nationalists in their operations. The method used by the nationalists in their struggle for greater political participation and eventually self-government. We looked at these methods. In the next class, we'll be looking at nationalist movements in British West Africa. And I'll see you at the next class.